So let's get started. Welcome to the dp2 microlearning imaging series on different imaging features inside of dp2. Today we're going to be looking at auto head alignment and group balance. And if you guys don't mind just kind of raising your hand and letting me know that you can hear me, that would be great. Somebody, oh, perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We're going to spend most of our time today in DP2. I just had a couple of things that I wanted to talk to you about in the PowerPoint before we get started. So one of the things about the tools that I'm going to be covering in these sessions, they're all at no cost to you. And I raise that only because I've gotten some kind of interesting questions from different labs recently. One of the reasons why I'm doing this session on which tools have a fee associated or a click charge. None of the pieces that we'll be looking at in this series have an additional cost to the lab. They're all built into DP2. Many of them are designed for automation. So we're going to be looking a little bit at theory so I can explain some things that in your day-to-day operation might not be immediately apparent. And then we're going to kind of look at best practice. So included in this series is today auto head alignment and group balance, then using auto balance and auto balance batch, auto enhancement, click balance, and then rendering LUTs or lookup tables, and other ways to kind of enhance your imaging workflows, many of which are designed to work either independently or together, depending on what you're doing. So the auto head alignment and group balance features can be accessed from a couple of different places, either right-click menu from order images or from manage images or from the taskbar. And we're going to kind of look at all three as we walk through different process steps within this environment. A couple of things about auto head alignment. This system, if you will, was designed for school and sports labs. It uses crop setups to define, where the subject will be positioned within a crop. So we'll be looking at setting up the crops first and the right, how to get there and what to do. And then these are automatically applied to the images based on user settings from within the head alignment and group balance interface. Group balance is also designed specifically for school and sports, and I'll be going into that in more depth when we get into DP2. But it analyzes the images individually and as a group, and you can create setups for a wide range of either needs or types of images or types of work. It really depends on the lab. But it does apply those corrections, not just individually, but across the population. The idea here is that we're going to be correcting an image, but we're also going to be looking at that image within a group. And this is a place in DP2 that the design is really for 30 plus images, especially when you're doing your testing and setting those up. Although my test population isn't going to have that because I don't want to spend a lot of time watching progress bars. So just as a reminder for those of you who've been on here before, or for, if you're here for the first time, the DP2 help, what's new? Some of the new features are highlighted in the what's new in 20.3.99, which is what I'm going to be working in today. We continue to try to update and enhance the help in DP2. There's a lot there, and I'll be looking at some of that today. Just as a reminder about the link, the service portal can be accessed now from within the DP2 help menu, or as I have it, you can put it right in your browser. There is the knowledge base, which is a table of contents that has a long list of articles, as well as, when you're within the service desk and you type something in, we'll give you a list of maybe potentially related topics and articles. You can also request one-on-one training. I know many of you have, so we always look forward to hearing from you. As well as this session will be recorded and posted on YouTube, as I said, along with any Q&A that we get from the end, which will be, presented not as part of the video, but as a, a PDF, and the recording, of course, if you so choose. So let's take a look at dp2, and I'm just going to bring dp2 up. I can see that it's made an appearance on your screen just now. So I'm going to be working from within an order that has a variety of different images in it. You may find that you have these types of images in your lab. You may not have all of these types of images. You certainly you might have them all in the same order, right? It's really going to depend. So what I'm going to do is go through first the right-click menu from Order Images. I have the Analyzing taskbar up for a couple of different reasons. I'm going to stay primarily within this user taskbar because it's got access to all the things that I might need in this kind of workflow. If you're using the auto head alignment and group balance, this is focusing on maybe school or sports. The idea behind this initiative was really around being able to take a look at a large population of what there was some assumption inherent in the way this was done, that there's somewhat controlled lighting, and I know some of you are probably rolling your eyes right now, but the idea here is that you'll be wanting to potentially use these images in other things or in other ways, so that you not only want to correct them individually, but you want to automate the ability to correct them as a group so that we can bring them in line with each other, so that if you're doing composites or service items and so on, you'll have the automated capability of being able to do that all at one time. So those are some of the things that we're going to go through. First thing you need to do in order to be able to use this workflow is have crops. So I'm just going to briefly review that interface and what you'll need to do to make sure that you're all set up. So this is the cropping and head alignment right-click menu item, and I'm hoping that you can all kind of see the mouse highlighted there. It gives you a sub-menu. Some of these are pretty basic. You're probably either using these or using shortcuts to these, by selecting, either images here and there within the order, or a group of images, however you're doing it, to show, copy, paste, crop. Those are pretty clear. This set crop, one of the reasons I want to show it to you is because these are all of the different crops that I have set up. Depending on your lab will determine whether or not you have crops just set up for this, or you're using set crops that you've developed as part of other workflows, or just in general to be able to apply them rather than one at a time, but to groups of images at a time. The head alignment and group balancing, we're going to go there in just a second. There's the ability to set a head alignment based on a crop to show the head alignment, right? In this case, for that image, I have none. And these have all been cleared. I've been working with them in preparation for this class. But right now, these are all cleared, so there's no crop data. I can go ahead and crop and align images, but before I'm really able to do any of those things, I need to be able to set up the crops. And I want to show you this particular window because this is going to allow me not only to create and set crops, but to be able to set up a head alignment within the crop. And there's a wide range of reasons why you would want to either just set up a crop here or create a crop, especially if you've never been in the scanning world and you don't have legacy crops, in addition to being able to set up the relationship between that head and the face finding in the head and the crop. The face finding in the auto head alignment and group balance is based on KPARs. It uses the same basic tools, in addition to being able to find the face, right? Finding the top of the head and the chin and the hairline and the eyes and the ears and so on. And if you haven't used KPARs, and we could kind of look at that in another time in order to show you kind of what happens when that algorithm is looking for a face. But in this case, not only are we using that to find the face, but then we are providing dp2 enough detail to understand what I want my relationship of the face to be to the crop I'm using. So right now I have child portrait in my setup. But if I were to select perhaps child standing, you can see that my crop and the position of my, um, my head finding or my auto alignment tool is changing based on that. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead. I know that that was slightly where I needed to be just so I could change it. But you need to decide, do I really want this child to be and the head to be offset? Do I want to bring the child in the center? And what do I need to do in order to be able to make that happen over a wide range of images? So it's tempting to say, well, I just, I'll move this here, but it makes a big difference which image you choose in order to be able to do this. So example, I'm going to say don't do that. If I'm over with this child and I'm using that same set of variables, right? This child is going to fall more in range with, this is a portrait, but here's my child standing. So these are the kinds of things that you need to take into consideration because this is the base information that dp2 is going to use. So as you're running it over a wide population, you're going to want to really think about what you're testing and how you're testing. Now, in order to save something like this, I can do a couple of different things and I can manipulate this, right? So I'm looking at the top of the head, the chin. In this case, I'm going to include the child's ears because if you think back about what K-Parse does, we actually do that outline does try to find the ears and so on. So now I've got this child, but I don't have a lot of room side to side, so I need to be thinking about, do I want to constrain it to an 8 by 10, right? If I were to set this to constrain and set it, then it's going to go ahead and it's going to say this is an 8 by 10 and I need to go ahead and change that and manipulate it as I see fit. In this case, I'll set it so that I can understand and I can use the difference between those two. You'll also notice that I have options to hold the aspect ratio and constrain and so on. I then can look at my rectangle. This is where I want it and I can set that. I can either save this setup or I can create a second one and then I can save as. These then, the crops, the relationship between the crop and the head alignment is what I'll use when I go into my auto head alignment and group setup. That said, I do also want to say that if you want to, you know, child with no alignment, I'll just say no align, that's probably close. And then I say none, and I set it to have none, then I'm just really using the crop. So depending on what you want to do with this is going to determine how you use it, and I can just do a save as. Once you've set up your crops, and again, obviously I have a wide range of image types here. At that point, you'll need your crops, and then I can go ahead and select to go to cropping and use head alignment and group balancing. The head alignment and group balancing window, um, it can be used in a couple of different ways. The way that I'm going to use it today is I'm going to use it as drag and drop so that I could remove this child, right? Remove selected. I can add these different images so that I can pick and choose. And in the case of what I'm doing, of course, I do want to be able to pick and choose because I have a small number of a wide range of images. But this could be used as a workflow in the lab. They could simply decide that if I had an order that had a lot of different things going on, that would allow me then to go ahead and use different setups. The setup inside of the auto head alignment and group balance window can be a combination of things. You can see here from the front, I can do the images in a chute, I can do the images in a box, I can select the images from an order. I have auto head alignment enabled and I'm using a crop that was seniors 8 by 10 that I did before. But I've got variables here that are important to understand, and that's horizontal, vertical, positioning, allowing it to zoom. I also have group balance enabled for this, but I don't have to. I could have a setup that was just for crop and not for group balancing, or I can do it all. Which in this case, I think the first thing I'll do is do it without it, and then I'll go ahead and we'll talk a little bit about group balance separately. So in the head finding, the default is what you see here, which is to find the entire head against the background. or you could assume the eyes are at a 47%. In this case, this is the default, but you could see it's 20 to 80. And that would mean if you found that the way that the images were being shot didn't really fall within the parameters, the head finding parameters that dp2 used by default, you could force that as an issue. Now, recalculating the head position, this is really for, the images that have been processed, if you're doing any kind of back and forth, or if you want to reset something and do it for everything. And the reason that this is important, or all the images, is because during the process, and as we're working with the data from the head alignment and group balance, in order to allow you to reprocess without having to reinvent the wheel, we save that information in, and we're going to show you this, we'll come back to this. We save that information in the digital SBA data table, or what's called the composite SBA data table here on the analyzing taskbar. You can see it's the last button in that user taskbar. And we're going to see this accumulate, and I'll come back and delete it. We save that information to kind of expedite the process if you do need to go back and forth, but we don't auto delete it. So for those labs that find they have a tremendous amount of information in this data table, that's why, because we're collecting it. Once you've gone ahead and you've gone through the process of using auto head alignment, you can feel free to delete the data that's in that data table unless you need it for some other research purpose. So I'm going to save this setup without my group balance. And then I'm going to come back and I'm just going to run it for these 4 images just to kind of give you a sense of what's happening if you haven't used it before. So I'm going to select to process all. So you can see that it's processed all. And what it's done is it's kind of a 3-stage process because of the way, or in this case, actually, it's a 2-stage process. What it's doing first is it's taking a look at it's finding the images or finding the faces in the image. Once it's done that, then it goes ahead and compares them. So that first we look for the face, then we kind of look at the image data itself. We separate it, and not physically. You don't see the images moving around in your order images data table, but we separate it by date and by camera model, so that we can begin to understand, as we're aligning all of the information that we have about an image and want to bring that all in line with each other. So as an example, in a composite, faces aren't all different sizes and so on. We have the ability to do that, and that's really the kind of information that we're using. Some of that information, such as the balance information and so on, we are saving into that table that I just showed you. So as an example, if I were to look at that table now, you would see the data based on the what I just implemented. And again, you can just delete it because, of course, if it had failed and so on, we would still be keeping track of that information. So, so now you can see, I wanted just for these 4 images, I just want to point out something so that you get a sense of what dp2 is doing. So what it's doing is it's doing its very best to understand kind of the eye position. We're balancing toward the eye position. So I've got a couple of these set up as order items so that you can kind of take a look. And I had the grid, hopefully, yeah, it still is. So I have the grid set up to display in the order items where you can really see this. And I did that so you could get a sense of where the eye placement is in the top of the head. And I'm going to open up another one, and you just looking at them side by side. This is one way to judge your results as you're working through this. And although this looks a little obnoxious the way I have it, just to give you a sense of dp2 looking at the relative top of the head size and the chin and doing its best to align where the eyes are so that they are relatively well positioned together. It's kind of an important part of trying to align all of these things so that ultimately you can use them in service items or composites and so on. And again, in this particular case, I did not use my group balance tools in order to work with this. I'm going to go back and I'm going to reset these. So what I'll do is I'm just going to go to adjust images. And from inside the adjust images, I've just left these selected. Obviously, your workflow might not be quite the same as the one that I'm using to show you these test images. I'm going to reset these. I'll just bring this to your attention because I did have a lab very recently who said, oh, I've never seen this before. This was introduced a little bit later, but now we can either reset all the corrections, keep the crops, or just the color. So I'm just going to say all, so it's going to reset everything and they go back to where they are. And then I'm going to go back into my group balance and head alignment. I'm going to close this because I don't need it anymore. This time I'm going to go back to group balance and I'm going to enable the balance. I'm going to talk a little bit about what you're seeing here. And I realize that I've covered a lot of territory in a short period of time, but I'll try to review it kind of all together when I get to the end, because I do want to make sure that we get to some Q&A today. So there's really 3 different ways that you can use this, and there's a couple of different tools inside of group balance. I'm not going to try to demonstrate them all, but I do want to just highlight what these tools are so that you're aware. And some of these can be used together. Some of them can be used independently for different types of work. All of these are documented in the help, but it kind of pays to think about these in a larger context, right? So I might be using other tools in other parts of my workflow that could either be complemented here, or this could be, you can set this up so that it's your entire color correction workflow for this type of work. Because this type of color correction is not recommended for candidates, for outside shots. We have other tools for that kind of. It's not recommended for kind of general digital capture images that you might be getting from multiple sources and not always from professional photographers. So this is not intended for that type of work. So I'm going to show it to you first, and it's kind of automated auto group balance, and this uses some of the kind of density red, green, and blue tools that we're familiar with in dp2. These are offsets, and they're saved in the database, just like it would be if you were using DSBA, but it takes an additional step, and I'm not saying that it uses that auto balance because it doesn't, but first it looks at the image content, the face. There's a couple of tools that I'm going to show you because you can modify the bias between the face and the background and so on. So you have some control here that you don't have in other places. And then what it does is it takes a look at that balance in relationship to all of the other images in a population. And it's really more successful. I'm showing it to you with 4, but it's really more successful in populations greater than 30. That's not to say it doesn't work in smaller populations, but it was kind of designed at that threshold. And the 2 radio buttons below it, the second is using flesh slope adjustments with an existing balance. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit in just a second. The other one is using a balance from a reference image. So if you wanted to correct an image and then use that as your starting point, dp2 is going to go ahead and it's going to apply that to all of the images in the order. It's not going to stop from doing the comparison, but of course, you're forcing a particular result using that. And it can use flesh slope adjustments with a balance from a reference image. So if you're using it as a reference image and you still want to be able to kind of bias, the flesh slope adjustments are about brightness, as a lot of the other tools are in this scenario. And you've got an opportunity here to create a group balance setup. And again, just like any other setup in dp2, this is going to be based on the work that you're doing, the test population that you're using in order to set this up, and what you're trying to get out of the result. So we've got a number of different tools here that I think are important to point out, because I think what happens is a lot of the time you'll get started with a tool like this and you might not spend a lot of time kind of going through and understanding what else you can do and how else you can tweak it, because you can really create setups for whatever the need is. So the foreground and face, and these are documented in the help, because I can see that I'm running to the end of the hour, or the end of the half hour that I promised. So the foreground face weighting bias allows you to manipulate the relationship between preferencing to the face or preferencing to the background, or the foreground. So what's happening in this type of an interface is not only is dp2 trying to understand the image in relationship to the other images, but we're also looking at the background of the image, so that, and I'll just move this so I can kind of give you a sense of it. With these images as an example, what dp2 is going to try to help you avoid is, if you're using your school or sports images in some sort of a composite, that checkerboard, where the backgrounds or of the images are lighter or too darker and so on. So dp2 is going to try to help you manage that in an automated way, by changing this bias. The flesh pivot is another place where we've made some decisions as kind of imaging experts around when you preference to darker complexions or lighter complexions, and we're allowing you here to 0 is kind of defaulting to what is kind of I think it's a medium tone, um, Caucasian skin tone. So it's something to keep in mind, because you can change that and experiment with that. And again, that's documented in help. So we can experiment one-on-one, if you want to. The same thing with the flesh slope. It's going to allow you to preference to light or to dark. Right now, that is set at the default, which is 0.25. I think the range is 0 to 2. I'd have to look. It might be 0 to 1. And then, of course, you can dial in straight offsets. So if you have a particular workflow where you are always making, or you want to be able to make a static DRGB change, you can do that here and then save it as a setup. And you can have as many setups, of course, as you need. It's a data point in a data table that will apply when you run this. So I'm going to go ahead and process these. One of the things I do want to make sure I did, even if you hadn't deleted the table, you might want to just go ahead and on the head finding, just say all the selected images, even if they're already processed. So if, unlike what I did, if you're not going in the middle of an order and deleting that data, dp2 is going to go ahead and overwrite it if I have it set this way. And I'm just going to save this setup to make sure that it now includes my balance and so on. And then I'll just go ahead and process all. And you can see that dp2 is going ahead and trying to make those changes and trying to align the background as well as the foreground, without making too much of a change to the relative complexion of any one of the images within that population. A couple of other things that I do want to point out is I'm going to remove the 4 of these, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag these my 2 little sports guys that are standing, there we go, into my auto head alignment window. I want to do that because there's a couple of other things about head alignment that I just want to highlight briefly before I open it up for questions. And the first one that I want to point out is the ability to horizontal positioning, vertical positioning, and allowing zoom. I would strongly recommend when you're learning and working with this tool is to try it in its different variations, because these could be important depending on what you have for crops or how you want things to move and so on. Within the head finding, we have the minimum face size is 2.5%. This variable you may want to change, because this is the variable that helps dp2 understand how big the face might be within the frame of the image, or within the size of the image, or the crop of the image. So I have 3 very different things, right? I have these up close portraits, I have the standing child, and then I have the child who's far away. I have other ones where the child is a little bit closer and sitting. depending on the result that you get, this variable, the minimum face size, could be changed higher or lower depending on if the child was further away. So in a case like this, I might make that a smaller percent. And it's, a little bit of experimentation goes a long way with this kind of thing. The edge finding strength can be manipulated based on whether or not you have a busy background, right? So I'm using green screen images, which are pretty straightforward. But if you're trying to find a child against a flowered background or, some grass or whatever that's very busy, the edge finding strength can be shifted up or down, and the range is documented in the help, so that dp2 understands that it's got a busy background and it uses a slightly different set of parameters in order to be able to find that face, and find it and use it accurately. So those are really kind of at a very high level, and I know I've kind of buzzed right through this. What's happening in the head alignment and group balance. And what I am going to do is kind of unmute everybody to give you the opportunity to ask questions. And I'm hoping that you have some. I do have a couple that came through on the Q&A pod. So I'll ask that. I'll start with those if I don't have, I don't get any questions. So I think I'm going to unmute everybody. See if I can successfully unmute. But if you do have a question, what I'll do, I think, first is I'll read the question that I have here that says, when you use the balance from a reference image function, are you saying that this will apply the exact color correction to the reference image, or is this going to analyze the flesh tone of the reference image and try to match the flesh tones from all the images, but using separate color corrections? So what I'm saying is that if I use a reference image, dp2 is going to go ahead and apply that reference image. Now, one thing to remember within that thought is that dp2 is also going to be looking at the body of those images. So in the end, they may not all be the same, but it will apply those values and then it'll try to balance them together, right? Because it goes through that second step. And now let's see if I can unmute you all. Or if you just, I'm going to clear the hand raises. And if you could go ahead and, if you have a question, go ahead now and raise your hand. Okay, so I've got a couple of other questions. So does the auto head alignment look for or handle multiple faces in an image? And the answer to that is it's a great feature request, but no, it doesn't today look for multiple images. So why is my comp SBA data table saving image data? Okay, so what happens is we save the image data, and I think I explained it earlier, right? And maybe I didn't explain it well enough. We save the image data so that in the table, so that if you go back and you need to reprocess or you need to do something else, we don't have to go through the analysis all over again. And if you want to force that issue, you can of course delete the data, or you can just tell dp2 to check that flag, right, to reprocess everything, right? You could do all the images in the population and so on. And it looks like I have one other question. Can I just apply offsets for different customers or types of images? So I think the answer is yes, if I understand the question correctly. And if I don't, then I'll try to get you to clarify. So the idea behind doing a setup is the ability to change or manage any one of these variables based on what your need is. So that if you wanted a head alignment and a group balance specific to doing something for a particular customer, you could just simply create a new setup, right? So this could be, customer-based setup, and then save that setup so that if you had an order, if you were coming in by order or by shoot, you could then select that setup, and whatever those values or variables are, you would be able to implement those at a customer level, because this is really not specific to customer. It is, the activity is specific to order, but the setups don't have to be. I think those are my last questions. Unless I have somebody else that can, if you raise your hand, I can unmute you. But otherwise, it looks like I could give you back a couple of minutes of your day. Okay, so if everybody's good, just raise your hands. Let me know you're good. And I'll thank you very much for I'll thank you very much for participating today. And again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us through Service Desk. I appreciate it. Oh, thank you. Take care.